Welcome back to the Ancestral Findings Podcast. By 1830, the United States had reached a new kind of maturity. The Revolution was no longer in living memory for some, though a surprising number of veterans were still alive and tucked into households across the country. Andrew Jackson was president. The Erie Canal had transformed trade in the North, and the South was leaning heavily on slavery and cotton. The country was bigger, louder, more divided, and more connected than ever before. And right in the middle of all that, the federal government rolled out its fifth census. This one looked a little closer. It counted a little smarter. And for those of us digging into family history, it quietly handed us some of the most useful clues of the early census years. What made the 1830 census different? If you've worked with the 1810 or 1820 census, you know what a headache it can be trying to figure out who's who in a household of tick marks. But in 1830, those tick marks start to tell a better story. For the first time, the census listed the age of every free person, male and female, in 10-year bands all the way up to 100 years and older. That means you could look at a household and see, for example, a woman between 70 and 79 living with a younger couple and their children. That's probably someone's mother or mother-in-law. You couldn't always prove it from the census alone, but it's the kind of clue that can send you looking in the right direction. They also counted enslaved individuals in the same detailed age brackets, which helps when you're tracing enslaved ancestors or looking at the structure of a plantation household. It's still impersonal. Names are missing. But you can begin to estimate birth years or identify patterns when comparing across years. This was also the first census where the government took note of military service for Revolutionary War veterans, not in the household entries, but in separate schedules. It's worth knowing that those existed, even though many of them were later lost or not preserved, as well as the population schedules. The 1830 census broke free from the vague categories of earlier counts. Children were now divided more finely, adults were tracked more closely, and people over 60 were given far more attention than before. For researchers, that means you can estimate birth years with more confidence. I've used the 1830 census to distinguish between brothers or cousins with the same name. If one head of household is 30 through 39 and the other is 40 through 49, you can line that up with land records, tax rolls, or wills, and finally figure out which is which. The census helps narrow the field when names were reused again and again. Here's where the census really shines. It often shows elderly parents living with their children. Someone born before 1770, possibly even the 1760s or earlier, might appear in one of those upper age brackets, quietly living in the household of a son or daughter. For a family historian, that's a gift. In some cases, I've seen widowed mothers or disabled veterans show up as the only person in their age range on the page. That lone mark under female 80 to 89 can be the only surviving record of a woman's old age, especially if she outlived her husband by decades and didn't appear in court records or land deeds. It's a reminder that, while these people weren't named, their presence still echoes through the page. The 1830 census counted every free person in the United States, as well as every enslaved person and other free non-white individuals. As always, only the head of household was named. Everyone else was grouped into age and gender categories, divided into neat columns across the page. Census takers, still U.S. Marshals and their assistants, used printed forms again, which helped create a more consistent record across the country. But the quality still depended on who was holding the pen. Some pages are neat and orderly. Others are smudged, rushed, or out of alignment. So you have to carefully count columns to make sure you're reading the right one. There were also a few cases where census takers made margin notes, scribbles that aren't official but sometimes explain something unusual about the household. I've run across notations like blind or widow or house burned. They aren't common, but when they show up, they're worth noting. By 1830, migration was picking up speed. Families were packing wagons and heading to places like Arkansas, Michigan, and Missouri. You can often track this movement from census to census by looking at age patterns. Let's say you find a head of household in Ohio with children ranging from under 5 to 15 years old. The father is in the 30 through 39 age range. That likely means the family moved to Ohio sometime around 1820 or just after. If they weren't in Ohio in 1820, they may have been in Pennsylvania, Virginia, or Kentucky. From there, I check land records and church rolls to trace their path back. Sometimes, those younger adults, sons and daughters in the 15 through 19 or 20 through 29 brackets, are living with their parents in 1830, but move out on their own by 1840. That gives me a chance to build out a timeline of when children came of age, got married, or left home. It's small, but it's enough to start threading together baptisms, marriage bonds, or land purchases. One of the most useful things I've done with this census is build out family groupings using the age breakdowns. If I see two men with the same name in different counties, and one household has a female aged 60-69 while the other doesn't, that helps me figure out who's more likely to be the son of a widow or the older brother. Age distribution becomes a kind of fingerprint. It also helps to look at neighbors. In 1830, families often lived near each other. Parents on one plot, children on another, in-laws next door. If you can spot similar surnames grouped together, that might signal a cluster of extended family. I once traced a line of 5 brothers by noticing that each one had a head of household listing just a few houses apart from the others across 2 pages. I also check whether someone's household is shrinking. If they had 10 children in 1820 and only 3 minors remain in 1830, you've got a good window for when the older ones left home. That lets you start checking for marriage or land records in the same county. And if someone appears for the first time in 1830 with no trace in the 1820 census, that's often a sign of either westward migration or a coming-of-age moment where a son is now listed as head of his own household. I'll then check local tax rolls a year or 2 earlier to see if he showed up before buying land. The 1830 census is still limited in what it gives you, but it quietly opens the door to some of the best early research you can do. It helps you estimate birth years, track older relatives, narrow down family groups, and spot newcomers in a county. With some patience, it becomes more than a list of tick marks. It becomes a map. Behind each set of numbers is a life in motion, a household growing or shrinking, a mother growing old with her children, a son striking out on his own, a Revolutionary War veteran living out his final years under his daughter's roof. These aren't just statistics. They're the turning points that help us see our ancestors not just as names, but as people making choices in a changing country. If you're tracing families in the early 1800s, the 1830 census might just be the quiet workhorse in your toolbox. It won't give you headlines, but it will give you enough clues to keep you moving forward, one column at a time. One of the quiet gifts in the 1830 census is the chance to trace Revolutionary War veterans, not through obvious labels, but through patterns and connections you can follow with a bit of digging. By 1830, many men who had fought in the Revolution were in their 70s and 80s, often living with adult children or grandchildren. Some were heads of households, but many were not. They don't always stand out in the census, but their pension records, if they applied for one, can shine a light on their final years. And if you compare those pension files with the census, you can often place them exactly where they were living and who was caring for them. Congress passed a major pension act in 1832, just 2 years after this census. That act opened the door for any surviving Revolutionary War veteran to apply for a pension, even if he hadn't been injured or didn't serve for long. As a result, thousands of elderly men came forward and told their life stories in handwritten applications, where they lived, who they served with, how old they were, and in many cases, who they were living with at the time. Some of the best stories I've come across in early American genealogy came straight from those pension files. One veteran wrote about being a drummer boy at the Battle of Brandywine. Another described hiding in cornfields in North Carolina while British troops swept through the area. Some were living with sons, daughters, or neighbors who gave sworn statements to confirm the veteran's age and service. Here's where the census comes in. If you see a man in the 1830 census listed as 70 to 79, living with younger adults, and you suspect he was a veteran, you can check the Revolutionary War, pension, and bounty land warrant application files on websites like Fold3 or through the National Archives. If he applied in 1832, there's a good chance his file will tell you exactly who he was living with, and in many cases, that matches up with the census household you found earlier. Sometimes the pension file gives you the names of adult children or grandchildren. Other times it names neighbors who served alongside him, and those names may appear just a few households away in the 1830 census. The connections start to form quickly once you know what to look for. It's also worth checking for widows of veterans, especially if there's a woman in the 70 through 79 or 80 through 89 age range living alone or with a son. Some widows applied for their husband's pension after his death, often in the 1840s or later, but their household may still appear in the 1830 census. If the man died just before the census was taken, the widow might already be listed under her own name as head of household. These pension files can stretch across several pages, sometimes dozens, and include family Bibles, letters, affidavits, and detailed memories of life before the country was fully formed. And when you pair them with the quiet columns of the 1830 census, they start to come to life. So if you're tracing ancestors born in the mid-1700s who lived into their 70s or beyond, take a closer look at the 1830 census. Look for those older age groups. Follow the households where they appear, then turn to the pension records and see if their story was told. You might be surprised by how much they left behind. Thank you for tuning into the Ancestral Findings podcast. Be sure to visit ancestralfindings.com to grab your free genealogy ebook. Ask for a complimentary genealogy lookup. And sign up for our weekly historical postcard giveaway. A special thanks to our Patreon supporters. Your contributions help to anchor our family tree firmly in the ground, allow our lineage to fly high, and keep our journey through history on the right path. Wishing you a fantastic day and happy searching.